Why don't I let you gentlemen just introduce yourselves for a moment and just any opening thoughts. Would you like to begin, Ramsey?
Okay, thank you. There's, cooperative energy. We are probably in a different place to other people, and that's because we're a different type of business. So you're talking about sort of customer service trust, I think is a sort of key word there. We're a customer-owned business, and that drives the dynamics. So that's a sort of slightly different perspective we come from. I would say, because there's been a bit of speculation going on, we are for profit and we do support people making profits. I was being accused of being a non-for-profit sort of a bit at the end of last week. We are for profit, we do support people making profits, but there is a difference and a different dynamic, and I think that's where we probably come with a slightly different perspective.
Thank you, Ian?
Yeah, good morning. Ian Peters, MD of Residential Energy at British Gas. Residential energy, relatively simple business. 85% of the input costs are largely out of our control. Margins are around 5%. We read meters, we send out bills, we collect cash. Profits are used to invest in Britain's energy future, 110 billion needed over the next decade. Centrica has already invested 12 billion over the last 5. But 58% of generation capacity is turned off by 2023. So keeping the lights on and keeping the gas in the pipes is one of the key issues. And as Julie said, the so-called trilemma of ensuring energy supply, decarbonising the economy and affordability basically fractured in 2009 and the world changed. I think events of recent days have showed either limited understanding of the principles or an acceptance of them. Politicians, journalists, consumer groups and customers have all challenged, I think, various aspects of that. I think there are key topics for debate today and some allegations and some myths we might want to explore and shoot down. Prices are artificially high. I think the comparison with Western Europe would explode that one. We've got the second lowest gas prices outside Finland. There are hidden millions in the generation business. That's an interesting one. I mean, Centrica discloses all of its profit margins. Upstream makes about 5.9% after tax. The others, I think, are less transparent, so there's one to explore there. We 100% supply ourselves in opaque terms. Again, I can speak for ourselves, that's not true. My business buys 10% of its power and gas from upstream on market rates, so I'm not entirely sure what the truth is there. Suppliers are lacking transparency. I think in upstream there is a case to be answered there. I've talked about Centrica's position. Bills are complex, absolutely true. Most of my customers want to be billed in units that they can see on the meter, not in strange things called kilowatt hours. So I think there's a debate to be had there about decomplexifying a bill, if there is such a phrase. We've got too many products. I think historically that's true. I think Julie's raised the good question about what's the right balance between innovation and choice. What else can we talk about? Prices lack comparability. I think that's also partly true. And the removal of a lot of the discounts and the cash incentives, I think, all help that comparability. I'm personally in favour of standing charges. And I think Maxine and her team made the right decision not to regulate the level of them. And I could go on. Energy efficiency is the sustainable solution to rising prices. Absolutely true. And we might get into the joys of eco later on. I think in the context of a trust debate, that a lot of the pre-election rhetoric is not helpful. I think it challenges some of the market fundamentals, and in and of itself, I think, raises issues around trust. And the big question for me is, what are the measures of success in this market? Again, Ofgem have posed the question. I think we need to answer it. My biggest worry is we go through the biggest transformation of 2 decades. We transform the products. We revolutionise the way the industry. And in 18 months' time, someone decides it hasn't worked. I think getting clarity up front of the measures of success, I think, is probably the most important question for today.
Thank you. Your perspective, Basil?
Richard, morning all. Basil Scarsella, I'm the CEO of UK Power Networks, the distributor in this part of the world. So if the lights go off today, there's others from UK Power Networks you can go to, don't come to me. But if the lights stay on, it's because of us. Now, Ian's covered a lot of the stuff that I think the audience will want to ask about. But he mentioned myths, and one of the myths that I would like to dispel is the fact that electricity prices are going up because an increase in distribution costs. Let me be very clear. Distribution costs account for 16% of a average domestic electricity bill. So if you assume that the electricity bill for a year on average is £500, the distribution costs account for £80. So even if the price, our price went up by 10%, and it doesn't, but if it did, it would add £8 per year to an electricity bill, which is equivalent to just over 1.5%. So let me be clear, the price increases that have been announced by some of the suppliers are not due to increase in distribution prices. Keep in mind that it's £80, which is about the equivalent of the margin the supplier makes on an average energy bill. And we invest £1 billion a year to maintain the networks. But during the last 3 years, we've improved the reliability of the network by something like 40%. Therefore, our lights go off 40% less than they did in the past. And as a consumer in this part of the world, you can expect on average, and averages sometimes hide lots of sins, your power should go off once every 4 years. Now, I'm sure there's people here that have had power off probably more than once in the last 4 years, but on average, once every 4 years. So when we look at the distribution network, it's £80, customer service has improved, costs have come down, and importantly, we're in the process, we're a regulated industry, we're in the process of getting our plans approved by Ofgem for the next 8 years, 2015 to 2023. And all of the networks, there's 14 networks in the UK, I manage 3, all of them have actually proposed to keep price increases flat, constant in real terms, or even decreasing on average. No one has actually proposed price increases for distribution costs to go up over the next 10 years. So I think not only distributors have delivered in the past, but we are proposing to continue to deliver in the future through improved customer service and reduction in costs.
Thank you, Basil. So a set of range of perspectives that we have here on the stage. And what I was intending to do is have a little bit more of a conversation towards the medium term, because the specifics of the day-to-day is a little bit contentious for what we're trying to do up on our conference today, but more about where's this going to end up and where are we taking this as an industry. You mentioned the lack of a commonly shared vision for what retail looks like in the 3 to 5 years. What's a successful retailer look like? I was going to ask a question that takes us there. Is there, in UK PLC at the moment, is there anybody that you do see who's allowed to make a profit?
Shall I go first? I mean, I think the general sentiment, this is not an energy point, the general sentiment is moving against large corporates and institutions. That's very different from saying there's no permission to make a profit. And I could quote you examples of large organisations making 8 billion without being in the public domain. I mean, the way I look at this in the context of permissions is about getting a number of things right simultaneously. Excellent service, customer growth. If you get both of those right, then I think the permissions to make a profit are much higher. And I think on some of those dimensions, the energy industry's got a way to go. But in and of itself, I think, is there a campaign against making a profit? I think no, but that it's more challenging to meet the hurdles needed.
So almost if you're perceived as being the best, as judged by customers are joining you and choosing you, and you have a competitive market offer, then that's okay. So if I'm not sure, someone probably knows offhand, the likes of Sky makes a lot of money, I assume, out of the UK. Yeah. But no one says that's, Vodafone and O2 make a lot of money, and those are much higher margin businesses. Do you think it's because they're nice things or because they've got excellent execution to go with it? Any thoughts or perspectives as people looking out of the industry?
I think there is a general perspective that businesses that are providing what are regarded as sort of very basic commodities, power and to the water and those sort of things are, it is regarded in the public perception as partly just a service rather than, and the expectation is that you shouldn't be making as much profit. That's rightly or wrongly, and it probably is a hangover from the days of nationalisation and the logic behind sort of national ownership. The profitability of some of the privately owned water companies, supporting your view, is less in the public domain. But I think there is that perception. Nobody minds how much money Apple make, or don't seem to. We still keep buying their phones and so on, knowing that they're making one hell of a lot of profit, but we're more resentful about the electricity to charge them up.
Richard, I don't see that the community in the UK regards profit-making organisation as committing a crime, to be honest. I think we need to put, from an energy perspective, we need to look at it as what's happened over the last, say, 5-10 years, where during a period from 2008, it's been difficult economically, and every time, excuse me, you pick up a paper, you read about the recession and the cost of living and so on. During that period, energy prices have actually more than doubled. So are we really serious that not to expect any flack from the community? I think that's unrealistic. But I think, as has been said before, the previous speakers, I think it's the challenge for the industry to explain what the bills are made up of and what is causing the increase and where the money ultimately is going. Why have prices doubled in the last 10 years? I think we failed to actually explain that properly. And I think until we do that, we'll continue to cop it, and in some ways, rightly so, when everybody else, wages are going up 1 or 2%, and prices for energy have doubled over the last 10 years. So I repeat, are we really serious that we're not going to cop it? I think it's only the natural thing for it to happen.
Could I just come back on that point? I mean, prices have gone up to that degree. Bills haven't, and I think that's an important point. I mean, our average bill's gone up 4% per annum over the last 6 years, and profit margins, by and large, have stayed broadly constant, despite what you'll hear to the contrary. So do I think we could do more to communicate that? Yes, we could. And I don't want to go to the medium term, Richard, but if you look at the 3 press releases that have been put out over the last week on price rises, they are the most open, transparent and informative I think we've ever seen about what's going on in the downstream world. As I said, I think we've got a way to go in communicating what's going on in the upstream world across the industry. That's where the area of suspicion, I think, is now centred.
Yeah, I think that some interesting points there, and I think if we come back to public perception, the public perception and perception and reality, accept are not always the same. Public perception is that the public are being squeezed, they're getting increases which are above the rates that their incomes are going up, so it's a higher proportion of their income. And that perception is saying, come on, share the pain with us. You and your shareholders should be taking some of that pain. So I think that's where some of the public perception is coming from. And then I think that takes us on to the point as to what are some of the things that have been driving the costs up that have in turn led to prices going up. And again, I think this links in with a slightly longer term. One of the issues has been sort of social and environmental costs. And I do believe we need to have a UK intelligent public debate around where it may be challenging. I see everybody smiling. There's about where those costs should actually lie, and we need to perhaps separate them out. There can be, I think, fairly strong argument for some of the environmental costs, and we've had that with ROCs and with FITs, and we'll have it with contracts for difference and so on, to reside within the industry. But some of the social costs that sort of embedded within eco, for example, should that not be around lifting people out of fuel poverty, and as a social measure, should that not be a national sort of thing that's done rather than sort of a quasi-tax through the utility bill, which means that the pensioner living on a low income is paying its same share towards that as those of us that enjoy higher incomes.
Can I ask you then, you could almost argue that we created a political vacuum because there's none of the energy companies, the retailers, have been visibly, if you think about the relationship to creating profit and the relationship to the regulator doing what the regulator asks. We had a quick conversation earlier about supermarkets. Why is electricity any different from milk and bread? Supermarkets make money of it, and your instant response was because they put the pressure on the value chain.
Yeah.
None of the retailers yet have particularly broken ranks to say, actually, we are the customer advocate here. It's very well to say we want these social tariffs. It's very well that we want this, but I don't recall any of them taking our consumers, a massive engagement exercise that says of our X million customers, they have a perception it's this. And almost putting themselves on the side of the consumer by necessity breaking ranks with generation, sensible discussion. Your point about an intelligent debate, everybody has maintained that intelligent debate. Do we think there's any risk of a retailer almost going back to the consumer side and being much more political in terms of actually, we are responsible for this bit of it, this bit of the cost, and the rest of it is just passed through, and almost shining a light down the value chain on the costs that come from government, come from generation, come from transmission and distribution?
I think the more light that should be shined on that, to use your phrases, the better really. Make that, that would be really helpful, I think.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the big drivers of costs, which are the commodity, transportation, distribution, and social and environmental levies. I think what we're clearly seeing now, and it's good, and Ramsey made the point, is the light being very, very clearly shone on the last of those because of the weight of eco, particularly in the bill. I think there is a very healthy debate about whether eco is structured as a regressive form of taxation. I have some sympathy with that view. So I think that one's very much coming under the spotlight. T&D, I think, it's not the sexiest subject. Sorry, Basil. I think it's relatively. You don't want my job. It's not the sexiest of subjects. I think it's relatively well understood. I think people understand about replacing the old gas pipes and upgrading the grid for a new kind of nuclear wind debate. I think we'll get more profile on it. The commodity one, I think, is the one where I think we've got more to do as an industry. I talked about transparency, whether it's the self-supply debate, whether it's vertical integration. I think our view is that as Centrica British Gas, we need more debate on that, more transparency. We've gone, I think, further than anybody else. We've described our profit margins by generation fuel. We'll lose 100 million this year in gas-fired power. But we're kind of the sole voice on that, and I think it would be helpful for the industry as a whole to get more of an open discussion and open disclosure around the single biggest part of the bill, which is still commodity.
It'd be inappropriate for me to try and sort of comment on the retailers, but
You will anyway.
but you gave the milk example and the fact and pressure on the supply chain. I'm not sure that I know too much about milk, but if you're an independent electricity energy retailer, where will you buy your wholesale energy from? It's got to be the major six, right? Pretty much.
Or the independent generators.
I was about to say,
There aren't.
there's a substantial chunk of independent generation, and where do you?
This is back to
That's
me,
the question.
isn't
Where do you?
Fizz, thanks. Fizz, we buy from a number of people, and we will, by the end of this year, I think, have agreements in place to buy from everybody, independents and the big six. I think we come back to a real challenge for the industry, and again, it's as perception as much as reality. I actually do believe we have a reasonable amount of competition between the big six, but that's not the perception. And I think what we've got is, in public perception and probably political perception, is we have an industry that is dominated by 6 companies and has been for about 10 years, and they are looked on as a block, as a group, rather than sort of individually. And so when one that sort of misbehaviour from one is regarded as misbehaviour by all. And you also then get a perception from outside the industry that they do work as a group. And I absolutely firmly believe that there isn't, there aren't any closed door spec-filled rooms agreements or anything. I don't think any of that goes on at all. I think they actually do want to take business from each other and compete. But that's not the perception. If you are looking at coming into the industry, you have a look and you go along and talk to them. I can talk to Ian and talk to others and say, okay, I know you're going to sell me gas. I know you're going to sell me electricity. But there's just the sort of the doubt in the mind, could they close ranks again? And I think that perception, which may be different to the reality, is in the public mind. And I think that has deterred some people who are not in this room because they're not in the industry having a look and saying, do we really know? Your question, who do you buy the power from?
Just on that one, because I think it's in some respects the key debate. We've got, I think last time I counted, 21 competitors in the energy industry, downstream. That's way beyond what you'll see in telecoms, in banking, and I think that's a healthy thing to do. Liquidity, certainly in power generation, which was genuinely a big issue a few years ago, I think is far less so. We can debate about small scale strips, late in the clips, late in the kind of evening. But by and large, I don't think liquidity is the barrier. We sell 90% of our power onto the open market, and I think others do similar. The perception point, I think, is really important here. I think I've lived through 10 inquiries into the industry. I was even once accused of running one of those kind of smoke-filled things. There's no evidence to prove it. What we're starting to hear now is a kind of discussion building about whether we should have a full-blown competition review. I personally wouldn't want to leap to it, but I think we should have a grown-up discussion. If it's the only thing that will get this thing fixed, then we might reluctantly want to support it. It'll stop the industry dead and do nothing for the investment climate. But everything else has been tried and failed. So I'm not rushing to do it, but that's the big elephant in the room.
Yeah. See, I think there is adequate competition, because some of the examples. Look at the banks. Is there more than really 6 major banks? Probably isn't, and no one complains about the lack of competition. And I can't. Anybody understanding the market actually understands that there is competition between the big 6 retailers. But I come back to the way we as an industry have actually communicated the increase to the customers during a period where the community out there has suffered. Where, like I repeat, wage increases have averaged 1 or 2%. Energy prices have increased significantly, and we have failed to communicate that. And privatisation gets blamed, lack of competition gets blamed, but there are good and valid reasons why prices have gone up. Overall, there was one of the graphs in one of the papers yesterday. We still rank favourably in Europe in terms of energy prices. Only Finland is lower. So, but have we really communicated that? I don't think we have adequately.
I think drawing all those, there's the point we have the value today, but also in terms of we think about the retail market reform. You said that there's not much competition, but maybe there's just a perception of a lack of choice. Is that there's all people, but they look the same and they behave the same, which sort of brings me neatly towards RMR. In terms of if we are going to have a standard set of tariffs, and I would suspect the companies are going to have fairly similar sets of market research that says here's what the big chunks of the market are, and you're going to have similar wholesale market analysts around the price, you're going to have similar transmission distribution charges, and similar cost base. I mean, from a purely economic review, the more you bring these companies with less choice in what they can offer, common operating models, doesn't scale become a really important factor? I'm familiar with this as a horse that says, actually, scale in terms of how you deliver customer service is about one of the few things that differentiates companies. I mean, why wouldn't we have a big 3 rather than a name big 6?
That wasn't my suggestion, for the avoidance of doubt.
No, it was just a straight question that actually, if we look at the costs that are in the industry, Basil's saying T&D, sorted. Generation, we're saying, is a function of the investment plans that we put in place and fuel prices. That really only leaves us the amount we sell selling, marketing and servicing. And if you have big fixed cost projects like smart metering, like some of the eco elements that have big fixed cost chunks, the economic answer would say consolidate. That's why there aren't that many mobile phone companies underpinning it. You've got MVNOs that provide brands that do something different. But what is the economic argument that says small is beautiful, or we need more of those? How can they serve customers better?
I'll give you my answer in a minute, but you go first.
Thanks. I think it comes down to how much you believe in real competition, and historically innovation has often come, not exclusively, but often come from from the new entrants, from the disruptors, if you like.
They have less to lose by being disruptive.
They have less to lose, yeah, and they come in, and the only way they can get into the market is by being disruptive, and the only way they can do that is by being innovative. There might be a question about, under RMR and sort of all the rest of the regulation, actually whether you prohibit innovation. That's I'm not sure whether you do or you don't, but that if you look at other industries and other markets, it's Apple and Microsoft and so on, where it started small, and they were very disruptive to IBM and Honeywell. They didn't do them much favours at all. So,
but you're right, with a PC operating system choice of one and an Apple operating choice of one, it's a fairly concentrated market.
Microsoft's the sort of the new IBM, isn't it? The market moves underneath you. Yes.
With that sort of a thought, Ian, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there are elements of the cost base where economies of scale clearly work. So core operating costs, which for us is about 7% of the bill, it's clearly, there's an economies of scale argument there. Does that apply in commodity purchasing? No. Does it apply in T&D? No. Does it apply in eco delivery? I would actually argue there's a diseconomy of scale on eco, the way it's currently structured. I think it works both ways. The small suppliers have got, I think, legitimate exemptions from some of this up to a point. And again, don't want to get into the debate about what that point should be, which recognises the diseconomies of scale. So I think it kind of nets out both ways over the whole. I think RMR remains to be seen what will happen. I personally think there is enough room for to innovate. Time of use tariffs is an exempt category. We're leading the market on smart. We'll see that coming through next year. And there is room for manoeuvre, some room for manoeuvre on bundles, optional bundles and mandatory bundles is a kind of a bit of an arcane debate, but there's room for manoeuvre on innovation to bring things alongside the core energy tariff. And I think 2014 is a key year, certainly the first half of it, to see how that plays out. From a customer point of view, and I talk to a lot, what they want to say, and it comes up all the time in the context of supermarkets, is we want you to be working harder for our business. And I think one of the potential risks with RMR is it does shrink the range down and creates a perception we're working less hard. So unless we get the balance right on innovation to create the disruption, and I think the bigger companies can also disrupt in their own way, I think that's the risk, and which is why I keep circling back to what are the measures of success. And I have a personal reservation if we keep using inter-company switching as the sole measure of success, that's going to be a mistake.
Well, I mean, the unintended consequence of competition is you have to spend a lot of money acquiring people from their competitors from similar products. I mean, those are part of the cost that you build into a competitive world.
Yeah.
So sorry, you're going to say anything, Basil?
Yeah, I don't understand why, on the one hand, we're saying there's inadequate competition in the market. On the other hand, we're saying we should dictate to the retailers, to the suppliers, how many tariffs they should offer. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they can offer as many tariffs as a customer. They can offer as many tariffs as they like. Make it as complex as they like. I mean, if simplicity provides a competitive advantage and competition exists with 6 or more suppliers, then someone is actually going to simplify the tariffs, simplify the bills, and if the customer believes that simplicity is what they require, then they will go to the supplier that's offering simplicity. So I disagree with you that, you know, big is beautiful and therefore let's go from, there's inadequate competition, and I'm an economist, so there's inadequate competition with 6, so why don't we reduce it with 3 and then we'll get better competition? That doesn't sound logical to me.
I think probably a fair question is that, does the panel have a consensus view on whether there is or there is not sufficient competition as things stand today?
My view is there is adequate competition. And, you know, there's 6 major and how many smaller?
15.
15 smaller retailers. So,
Okay.
I mean,
I think you have to look at it, I would look at it in terms of outputs, and we've talked about some of them here. We've got the second lowest gas prices in Europe. I think it's the 4th or 5th lowest power prices. We've got among the highest switching rates in the world of any industry, 21 players, which for a commodity utility product is extraordinarily high. So I think, you know, yes. Is it a perfect market? We can debate that for hours. But is it a competitive market? Yes, I think it is, fundamentally.
What would you say, Fernando?
Yeah, I don't think I disagree with that too much, but I think it's something it's sort of we need to keep an eye on, and I think the interesting thing will be over the next year or two, probably sort of 18 months, I would guess, is to how many we have then, whether actually how many of the small people will not make it. You'd actually expect 1 or 2 not to make it anyway, just because they're that's the nature of things, and whether any of them, and I guess there's probably 2 to name them, First Utility and ourselves, who keep on sort of progressing, or you know, and what happens then become bigger challenges.
The biggest risk to competition, in the sense of how many players there are, is not RMR. It's wholesale price volatility. Yeah. That's the biggest risk. Nothing to do with RMR.
So moving towards RMR and perhaps some of the most obvious element of that, the tariff structures. Execution. Sometimes this industry has been blamed for systems leading and then some of the execution of the processes following, for all sorts of good reasons, but we collectively have not always given the best customer experience. I think that's probably fair. There's lots of people in here who have a responsibility for various elements of it, but everyone who thinks we've done a great job collectively, put their hands up now. I think that we know it.
Unanimous.
We all know it could have been better, right? And there's all sorts of lessons you can learn in hindsight in terms of implementing software and systems. And system changes are hard and all those sorts of things. We are about to move people's tariffs. We're about to take some people who were on tariffs that were particularly designed for them. And one assumes that you had a whole range of tariffs before and you're going to move them to a set that are now a smaller set. So potentially some people are going to end up paying more as they come through this tariff migration. Sheer logic would suggest so. Do we think there's any risk of us in losing the intent with poor execution as we go through moving people onto the consolidated set of tariffs and telling them why it's good for them individually to be paying a simpler but more expensive tariff?
I would draw a distinction between design and execution in this context. Execution, which in the narrow sense is how well do we communicate and transform the products, talk to the customer about why it's being done, execute it flawlessly from a systems point of view, I think is one thing. And time will tell how well we do that. I think the design part of that is a somewhat different question. And RMR was 2.5 years in the genesis, and I think much of the design I think is fine. I think elements of it will create a degree of public debate as to whether they are right from a consumer point of view. And I don't want to get drawn into the detail, but if I just picked one, sorry Maxine, I'm going to pick one just to illustrate the point. The prompt pay discount, which typically appeals to older ladies who pay by cash and cheque on time, is being withdrawn. I think that's an unfortunate side effect. There aren't many of them, but I think that's an unfortunate side effect. My worry about it in the current media world we live in is the focus will be on those 1 or 2 negatives rather than the many positives. And I think that's a communication challenge for all of us. As to
British Gas does nice things, gets far fewer headlines.
I have noticed.
Okay, Ramsey, any thoughts on that?
No, I think the jury's out on that. Actually, I mean, for us, we had the advantage, talked about advantages of scale, we had the advantage of starting off with a clean sheet and with new systems and so on, so absolute minimal impact on us, a couple of tweaks on the presentation of the bill, that's it. Yeah. I think that jury's out. I think there is risk. I think there is risk there, but we'll see.
Anything you'd like to add, Ian, in terms of?
No, but it's on the execution side. It's a distance to travel, and until last week we had 5 products. We're going to 4, so that element's not a big transition. I think moving the pricing structures is where a lot of the execution risk lay. I can use the past tense because we've actually done it now. Other suppliers have got different degrees of travel in terms of how many products they start with, what systems platforms they're on. So I think we're facing different executional risk. The design issues are common.
For sure, but you're absolutely right, is that it's very hard to design a policy that is universally better for every single person.
Yeah.
Because by definition, that would mean the money's got to come from somewhere. And in the current environment, the cost of change is there are always going to be some minorities that lose out in some way.
Yeah.
That will generate headlines which are predictable in terms of the current direction of travel. So I've very much enjoyed having the opportunity to ask the panel some questions. I wonder if the people on the floor have got some questions they'd like to ask of their own. We've got one down here at the front left. If you wouldn't mind just saying your name and where you're from. Anna's just bringing you a microphone now.
Good morning. Eamon Conway's my name, from Climate Remote Heating Control. I'd just like to ask the panel if they think, with regard to customer relationship improvement, 2 things. One, what can they learn from other industries? And secondly, where do they see innovation and technology adding to that experience?
Shall I go first? I won't name them, but I think we've observed, some quite smart, it's not a pun, some quite clever things done by the mobile telecoms companies around tariffs. And we borrowed some of that in what we call Tariff Checker, proactively writing to consumers every 6 months, showing them what they could save by moving to other tariffs. We've seen a 25% mobility inside our own base over 12 months from doing that. I think technology and innovation in the round. The digitisation of our world, I think, is the big thing. We've had 1 million customers download our app. More customers now contact me via smartphones than they do on the telephone. 2 years ago, that would have been inconceivable. So I think it's the digitisation of what we do is the biggest element of the technology-driven change. It's not for every customer. And I think we have to remember that we're trying to serve, certainly as a mass business, trying to serve everybody in the community. So I don't want to throw everything down an app-driven world. My mother would hate it. So it's getting the balance right between a very understandable digitised drive, and I think the real value add in terms of relationships overall, now and progressively into the future in the smart world, is about synthesising data to add value to the customer in terms of their consumption profile and saving bills. So I think that's at the heart of it.
I actually agree with Ian on all of that. I think digitisation has an enormous role to play, but it's not exclusively that. There are, we serve the whole public, and there are people that doesn't work with, and we must be very, very mindful of them. And my reality check is that because we're a customer-owned business, at our AGM, I don't sit in the front room talking to shareholders. I talk to our customers, which can put a slightly different perspective on everything. They haven't tweeted me, emailed me, or whatever. They stand up in the room for 500 people and ask the question. So it's keeping that contact with people as individuals is critical.
Basil, I know that innovation is an important element of what you're trying to do with Rio. What are your thoughts?
Two comments. Firstly, what can we learn from overseas experience or other industry? And the telecommunication industry that Ian mentioned. I wouldn't mind betting everybody in this room is spending significantly more on telecommunication today than they were 20 years ago. And no one is complaining, because the telecommunication industry has actually been able to communicate to its customers and tell me that the tariffs for mobile phones, the prices, are simpler than the electricity tariffs. If you can explain it to me, I'd be really interested in, the contracts we all sign and our kids sign. If you can understand it, you're a better man than I am. So the telecommunication industry have actually managed to get customers to spend significantly more on the service they provide, and there are very few complaints. So there's a lot we can learn, I think, in the way they've gone about it. On the innovation front, credit to Ofgem here, because distributors and utilities generally are not renowned for great innovators, and 5 years ago Ofgem made £500 million available for the distributors to bid with innovative projects which were funded partly by the Ofgem, partly by the distributors. And when we look forward with the decarbonisation of the economy, of transport, what's it going to mean for the distributors and the networks in terms of being able to cater for distributed generation, electric vehicles, heat pumps and so on. The changes that are occurring are significant, and innovation for what Ian probably described as a boring business in distribution is actually very, very important, and Ofgem have been the catalyst. And I think, again, the distributors have responded to that. And a lot of work is taking place to see what the impact of all the new low-carbon technologies are going to have on consumers.
Another question here at the front in the centre.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Chris Ward. I'm from a customer innovation agency. When the panel speaks about innovation, and there was a lot of discussion on the panel about you being in a parity market, consumers are increasingly apathetic because there is so little perceived choice. The cost of the bill, the proportion of the bill to non-related energy costs is increasing. And when you talk about innovation, you talk about product innovation. Can you point to any examples with the Big Six or with any of the 15 smaller players where there's been significant work done on customer service innovation as distinct against product or channel innovation?
Martina, it's a great question. And I think your basic point is right, looking backwards over time. And one of the side effects of RMR is to put more focus on service differentiation and innovation. I think that's a good thing. I'll give you one example from our place. We've changed the way we're going about innovation into a world of what is effectively co-creation with particular customer groups. The example I'll use, we're looking at the rise of tenants in the UK, private tenants, which is all to do with demographics and the housing market. And the way we serve tenants was not differentiated from the way we serve owner-managers. So we got groups and groups of tenants into a room about how they wanted to be served. And certainly private tenants are more mobile, they move property frequently. And we've created an entire service proposition called Mobile Energy. I've just announced the launch of it shortly. And it's designed for tenants. It's all around service, not about product. And it's about how we interact with them, given their lives are very different from a utility provision point of view from those of our own owner-occupier. So you'll see Mobile Energy come into the public domain. It's been beta tested for the last few weeks. It gets launched very quickly. But that is a pure service play. The underlying products are exactly the same because they have to be under RMR that all my other customers have got. But the service interface is radically different. It's effectively a mobile-only, smartphone-delivered service.
And I think there's some interesting points about the innovation in terms of when we have stuff mandated upon us, we end up with the level of change that we can accept. But the prepay revolution that happened in mobile phones, with the likes of technology of PayPal and Ping It, the Barclays offering that does something similar, changing payment techniques, changing how you pay for your energy. There just seem to be, the technology seems to offer opportunities to do very different service offers.
And yeah, if I do that one, and I've said this before in public, so it's not a reveal. Prepayment, I think, for all sorts of reasons we can probably relate to, has an element of a derogatory overtone to it. And I think with some justification looking backwards over time. Smart metering enables the complete transformation of the prepay proposition, because you can vend in home, you can vend off your mobile phone, blah, 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 blah. We're about 15 months away from that becoming a reality. And at that point, the proposition, to your point, the service proposition radically transforms into one more analogous to a mobile proposition. It's about 15 months away. I think we'll get there before anybody else because of where we are on the smart rollout. But that will turn it into a lifestyle choice if we get it right. One of the other side effects of it is because the cost of the meters are the same as the credit meters, I should be able to bring the price down for prepayment as a consequence of that. I think that will be a good thing in and of itself.
You have any thoughts?
Well, that's interesting. I think Ian's had more to say on that, and actually that prepayment and the sort of the smart metering, pay as you go or whatever, is the thing that I would say is going to come. So
you're making much more of the causal link between cause and effect in terms of consuming and paying.
Yes,
part of that sense.
Yeah,
of connection.
but as well, I mean, there it's using the technology to offer a very different service to the customer.
Okay. No, any more questions you have here? At the back, please.
Thanks. Yeah, hi, Alex Richards from BA Systems Detica. You talk about comparing with telco industry, but there's a couple of questions in my mind. Number one, we look at things like telcos where the value proposition has increased. You can do more with mobiles. You can, you get better devices and things. But within utilities, there's kind of a limited amount you can actually do. You get a tariff. This is what you get for it. And the other side is, do you feel as if the industry is shooting itself in the foot a little bit in terms of the way price increases are announced? As in, all seems to come together, which gives the illusion of, regardless of how true that is.
Do you want to talk in general terms, focus on the
There's only so far I can go in specific terms. Let me do the second one first. And you'll have heard me say it, you've heard Paul Massaro say it in recent days. 85% of the cost structures, give or take, are broadly the same. And the pace and scale at which those flow through the cost base are broadly the same. I mean, the very dumbed down analogy I use is if everybody's putting the umbrella up, the chances are it's raining. It tends to happen in a similar cycle driven by those three fundamentals. On the, what was the first question?
It was more about the comparison about the value that's been increased in telco.
Again,
yes, they pay more, but equally they've got a smartphone.
I'm a realist on this one. And we start from a position that energy is what's known in the trade as a low engagement category. I said Basil's business wasn't interesting. For most consumers, while bills are clearly a huge issue, it's not an intrinsically interesting topic. I think there are places we can go, and I talked about particularly the data that will come out of smart metering and enable us to synthesize and add value to a customer in terms of helping them keep their bills down. But would I see British Gas being able to stretch into entertainment? No, I mean I think there are practical limits and permissions we can go. I mean, Centric has got a history in the 10, 15 years ago trying to take the proposition into all sorts of things. It fundamentally didn't work. So I think we have to be practical about where the stretch is, but I think the evolution will be into adding value through looking at consumption data via smart meters. I think that's where the value add will come.
Again, it sounds a bit boring, but I think I'd just sort of agree and endorse what Ian was saying on that.
I quite like the analogy, if everyone's putting their umbrellas up, it's probably because it's raining. I might borrow that one. Any thoughts yourself, Basil?
No, I'll leave that alone.
So, what I'd like to do is draw it to a close here, and I'd like to thank our panellists for such a frank and open discussion in such an engaging way, thinking about how collectively we can address some of the challenges that face our industry. So thank you very much. Could you join me in a round of applause?